Good morning. I'm just going to continue with my series on the 2024 Olympiad in Budapest, and particularly the performance of Gukesh. Yeah, let's see. Domaraju is playing black against Parham Mahgdsooloo of Iran. Yeah, let's see what happens. So Mahgdsooloo plays e4, d4 even, d5, knight pawn c4, e6, queen's gambit declined. Queen's knight variation, Tarrasch defense. This is bold play. I'm not saying it's a bad opening. It isn't. It's very good, but it speaks of a confidence. It says he knows what he's doing here. Let's see if he does. So takes with the c pawn. This is very standard. Takes with the e pawn. And this will leave an isolated pawn. At the minute, he can't leave the isolated pawn by playing this, because then if he takes the c pawn, then the d pawn will come to, with the knight on e1, the d pawn would have come to e4, and then he would have supported it with the bishop. So tough. Again, he is in a position to do it, but it's defended enough times. It comes to g3 to double up with the bishop. The knight develops and the bishop comes to g2, and now he takes the pawn. If he lets him take and then take, then this pawn will be weak, so he has to take now. This is called the Rubinstein-Prague variation. The bishop comes to c5. He's perfectly happy to let the knight swap off, and then instead of having the isolated pawn, he would have what is known as the hanging pawn structure. Now, when you've got the isolated pawn, it's important to get your pieces out fairly quickly. And even although the isolated pawn will be a weakness in the endgame, it does come with some advantages, particularly the files on either side of the isolated pawn are half open and useful for the rooks, for the player who has the isolated pawn in this case. Gukesh can put his rooks on e8 and c8 and have a good position. Yeah. So the knight threatens the bishop and the bishop retreats, and now he's got 1, 2, 3 on the pawn as opposed to 2. But if he takes, then then he'll take, and I think maybe castles is the correct move after that. I'm not sure. But anyway, he doesn't take. He realizes it is risky. So the pawn pushes and the knight attacks the bishop when it comes also the way. And now he castles so that the queen is defended by more than the knight. The rook comes to e1 and the pawn comes to h6 to prevent the bishop coming here. The bishop comes to f4 and the bishop comes to e6. So both players have got all their minor pieces out. And the knight comes to c5 to threaten the bishop, to say, I'm going to get the two bishops, what are you going to do about it? So he says, not here, not today. He's willing to swap off a bishop for a bishop, but not a bishop for a knight. But that bishop is taken for the knight, and now when he takes back, the knight is attacked. And does that win him a pawn? Yes, it does, but it's going to be hard for him to hold on to that pawn. The knight doesn't really have a good square to retreat to at the minute. It can come here, but then it can soon get threatened by the rook as well. Pawn comes to e4. Yeah, great. And Gukesh takes on, pass on. Makes perfect sense. And the rook takes. The knight comes to b4, so that it's defending the rook and also the bishop, and also attacking one more time this a2 pawn, which he already attacks twice. So he brings a third attacker. He's ready to overwhelm the a2 pawn. And he was threatening the knight as well. The knight comes to d6, cutting off the defence for the bishop. Luckily, the bishop is defended by both knights. But he takes off the rook anyway. And the king takes, and the rook comes to d8, and I think it's here where Mahgdsooloo goes wrong. Yeah, he threatens the bishop, but it's going to be hard for him to... He can't at the moment move this knight because the queen's attacked twice, and it is going to be hard for him to defend it. Okay, he comes to d5. Alright, the bishop defends the knight, but he's threatening to take the bishop and then take the knight. So the bishop comes to e5 to threaten the bishop. And the queen comes to e6 so that it's no longer pinned to this pawn. Queen backs up the attack there, and the knight comes to b4, g4, where it's attacking the defender of the knight. And he brings in another defender for the knight. The knight comes out of the way, and the knight is now pinned to the queen and attacked. The bishop is attacked twice, so he hasn't got any choice. He has to give up a piece for a pawn. So knight comes to f5. This knight is still pinned, and now he attacks the queen and the bishop, so he'll be picking up this bishop. He could have taken the pawn. It wouldn't have made much difference. It would have resulted in the same thing anyway. The knight takes, and now he has a piece up. But he hopes to... He's got a couple of pawns for it, and he hopes to create some problems. He has actually got 3 pawns for the knight, so maybe it's enough. Gukesh defends his knight on g4. And yeah, defends also his pawn which was attacked on f7. So the knight is chased away, and the knight comes to e5. Looking at squares like f7 and e7, f7 and d7. The knight comes to c4, and he takes with the queen, saying, well, yeah, okay, if you want to swap queens, we'll swap queens. If you want to not swap queens, it's not going to work. Because if he takes the knight to not swap the queens, then Gukesh can play queen to e4 check and force the queens off that way. So he takes with the rook first, and then he takes with the rook, and then he takes the knight. But instead of playing queen here, he plays rook to d1 to give himself this check. Yeah, the rook comes back to play a defensive role, but you know, he's left himself open to a big attack here. The queen comes to h1, the king comes to f4, and now the rook comes to d5, and the queen, yeah, it can go here and say check, but then the rook comes away, and it's going to be hard for him to prevent the pawn coming here. The queen coming here, check. He can once the queen has moved, he moves the king. He can prevent the queen coming here by playing rook, but then the knight comes here, and that's mate as well. And if he pins the knight by moving the rook, then queen here is mate. So mate is unpreventable now, and Mahgdsooloo resigned. Yeah, I think he thought that he was going to get... well, he did get 3 pawns for his piece, and I think he thought he was going to get some good activity with these 2 passed pawns on the queen side, but they never really got going. And at the same time, Gukesh had a sneaky little attack. Yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share my videos. Thanks. Bye.